much. As you are welcomed before, I think it's very important to note, do you hear me? Yes. Anyway, I have a village voice, so I can survive without this mic. It is very important to note our theme today, which says human rights in word, or what we are trying to suggest and what we are trying to invoke in our mind by having such a topic like that is to actually think around the fact that how do we make this human right fruitful rather than being documented only in paper? How do we then interact with our human rights issues besides them being there and stuff like that? As you know also, for an example, our justices in South Africa are very expensive. In order for you to get justice, you need for you to be able to pay for it. So we want to take the human rights issues home. So with that being said, I think I should welcome you and welcome me as well. And, and I think what is important is to appreciate the fact that it was a Human Rights Day, it was a Human Rights Month in March. And we thought that we should continue to commemorate it regardless of it falling out of March as a month. I think it is very important to put this dialogue into content that the reason to commemorate the Human Rights Day is to extract inspiration from those who have fallen before us, and our forebears who have fought for this freedom and equality, that we can be able today to say that we can enter to the higher institutions like this and be able to access education. But what is important and what is supreme about human rights is that we should be able to look at the equality. I will take equality as a supreme right amongst all of them, because you have seen that as this generation we have declared economic freedom as our generational mission or economic emancipation. And we believe that the generations before have managed to succeedly managed to take us to political freedom, but what is left amongst us now is for us to take the baton and then be able to deliver the economic freedom. The access to economy, the mainstreaming of women, the mainstreaming of young people to the economy, the mainstreaming of the economy so that we don't have township economy, that black people are only isolated and made to think about small business and medium spaza shops. Black people must be able to benefit from their economy. The economy that we have must be able to respond to the challenges that Africa is facing. But when we are doing that, you need to have an intensive education that gives us skills, and the skills that are going to make us to respond to the challenges that Africa is facing. But most importantly, industrialization is going to be very important as part of the equalizer in this continent. Because you know that the education that we have must then be able to respond to the challenges that we're facing, such as challenges of industrializing our continent. Our continent takes away raw minerals, and there are issues of illicit financial flows. And that, by the way, when they affect us in the sense that we cannot use that money in terms of developing our people and enable them to access what is rightful to them. So we want to provoke all of us to be able to take this debate and own it amongst ourselves. I know I'm given little time had I been, so I'm trying to summarize everything that I have. Are you fine? So.
Thank you very much. I just want to underscore a few points that have stood out for me from just our first two speakers. There are questions around the labor market, and I think majority of the people in the room, are either in the labor market or trying to gain access into it. What does it look like? What does a labor market that is conscious of social and economic rights being placed above other, considerations in a country that is wrought with inequality? How do we make sense of the social infrastructure? What are the other players when we're talking about socio-economic rights? We've highlighted, the state. We have highlighted you as students in the room, but what about civil society? What about other non-government organizations? Who are the other people that we can count on, perhaps, or mobilize in our quest to realize social and economic rights? So I'd like us to extend the discussion to include, continental bodies, regional bodies too. How do they assist us in what I mentioned it in the beginning, as a roadmap of change. How do we make sense of a country with such high inequality? How do we make sense of a country that has a political democracy, but it isn't everyone's lived experience? So before I ask our esteemed guests, to address us, I'd like you to set the context for the discussion. I'd really like you to give us the context of what are some of the issues from the welcome addresses that are on your mind at the moment. Once again, for housekeeping, please make sure that once you've spoken, you switch off your mic. I will take rounds of 3. I'm very, very sorry. Do switch off your mouth too, because your turn is over. So I'll take rounds of 3 questions. It may be questions, it might be observations. And as I said, I'm really interested to hear of lived experiences when it comes to socioeconomic rights. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce our guest speaker for today. It's going to be an easy job for me because I think all of us have managed to see where she has led. So, Dr. Mama Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma is a qualified doctor. It's not an honorary doctor. Actually, what I found exciting about her bio is the fact that she was one of the founding members of SASO, the predecessor of what is called SASCO today. It's the generation of Steve Biko. Mama Nkosazana studied zoology and botany at the University of Zululand in 1971. And she continued from that and acquired her medical degree as a doctor. Mama Nkosazana is one of the longest serving ministers since the Republic of South Africa. Of course, he was sent by the country to African Union, but he's one of the only person who's ahead of him a bit is Mr. Jeff Radebe. But he has served in all of the presidents that have been there since 1994. She was then sent by South Africa to lead African Union Commission. And she has done us proud there by also formulating what is called Vision 2063, the Africa we want. What that means in short is a socio-economic blueprint which seeks to drive the development of the continent. So, she's also an NEC member of the ANC. She's an NEC member of the Women's League. Me adding spice onto it is that in all of the conferences she has been elected in, she has been the most voted. She has been the most voted, but she said I must stop because she's not looking for a job. So I will have to leave it there. Mama Nkosazana, you are welcome. Indeed, you are Mama Doctor. Because we're decolonizing this education, you are Mama to us, so I'm agreeing with you, President, on that one. Mama Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, we are welcome on stage. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Indeed, it's a pleasure to be amongst young people. It always re-energizes us to be amongst young people. And I'm happy that you are celebrating human rights and that you are not expecting a speech from me, but it's a dialogue between all of us, amongst all of us. So that is very exciting because in a dialogue, everybody learns. I will learn from you, you will learn from me. So that's what is exciting about this, unlike just coming to give a speech and leaving. So it's an interesting interaction. Already, they've set the tone. But I think before we start talking about human rights, whether we have them or don't have them, or whether they are on paper or not on paper. Maybe we should just put a bit of context why we even have the type of constitution we have. Because our constitution is actually hailed across the globe as one of the most progressive constitutions. And this had to be so because we came from the worst colonization of apartheid. So this constitution is trying to address all those fault lines that were there. So it was the lived experience that produced this constitution, which is the best. But now I think the issue is how do we ensure that what is in the constitution is enjoyed by all of us. So that's the discussion I think that we are going to have. But just to put a little bit of context, because when I look around, I can see that very few of you have the lived experience of real lived experience before this constitution. So it would be good to just give a context of what was there before. And I'll just be very short, but just to say we should always remember that in South Africa, the constitutions that were there before were really not giving rights to black people in general and to Africans in particular. They didn't give those rights. Whether it was just right to citizenship. There was an ID, which we all have now, but before, us Africans and non-white people, as we were called, we had what was called dompas, which was not an ID, but was almost a document to restrict you, to remind you all the time that you are not a citizen of this country. If you are a third-class citizen. It limited your movement, it limited where you can work, it limited your life. So the fact that we now have an ID that is universal is a big victory that we have won. We also, you did not have a right to a passport as an African. It was a privilege that you could be given, but it wasn't a right. It wasn't like you just go and say, apply for a passport. You don't have to explain to anyone where you want to use it, where you are going. So, and of course, there was really no equality before the law, because even the laws, there were laws that favored white people. So if the law itself is not equal, how can there be equality before the law? But of course, there were also inequalities even within that inequality, which I will come back to. If we look at education, we are correct to fight for the right of education, because education, as he said, is the quickest equalizer, besides it being a right. It's also very important for economic transformation. You can't transform an economy without the prerequisite skills. So education. But what was there before? For Africans, eventually there was Bantu education for us. Me, if I don't speak good English, it's because I studied Bantu education. And Bantu education was meant to give us just enough education to give the majority of us just enough education to be able to take commands from the white people and be able to follow the instructions they give us. And it's not a political propaganda. They said it. They even said, why should Africans study maths and science? Because it's just, they will never graze in those pastures of science and technology. And so that's what we had before. So if we look at health, it was the same. But not only did we have Bantu education, but the infrastructure for education, the teachers, everything was inferior. Even today, because we have not been able to catch up, if you take a white school and an African school, you see the infrastructure is not the same. And it wasn't just that your infrastructure was inferior, it was purposely done so. The teachers were not enough. I remember when I started school, there were teachers that were called Utisha Tiki. Utiki was 2.5 cents because the parents would put Otigi together to hire one of the kids to come and teach you because there weren't enough qualified teachers. And the parents would then, in the village, put this money. And then batumtaga sbanbana ageza zofundisa la abe utisha wala botike siba collect time. So that was the type of education struggles that we went through. Just to put your struggles in context. And of course, we at some stage were even told to study in Afrikaans. We didn't even have good Afrikaans teachers, let alone now to learn in Afrikaans. If you look at housing, there was no real housing for people. In the rural areas, there were no housing. In the urban areas, there was no housing except those houses that were meant to be dormitories for people who work in the cities as long as they work. When they no longer work, it's a problem. And then there were hostels for the mines. And even those houses, you can see they were even had asbestos, which we know is very detrimental to your health. Most houses didn't have electricity, they didn't have running water, they didn't have any of the basic things. And later, some of them were built with running water. Very few had electricity. The roads, even in those townships, our culture was denigrated. We were made to feel that our culture is barbaric. It should not be practiced. And if we did, it was because we were barbaric. We continued to be barbaric. Our languages were not recognized as real languages. So there are many things I can say. Jobs. In this country, Namana there would remember, there was something called job reservation, where it didn't matter whether you can go and have luck to study somewhere else, come back, those jobs you were not supposed to get. But there were also job reservation for the white people who really couldn't make it through merit, but these jobs were reserved for them. So that's what was there. The land. The land. Of course, Comrade Harry Kwala used to say to us, you know this question of the land. Who came carrying land to this country? And now I have to be worried, you know. But the question of the land, 1913 was probably the culmination, but land had been, people were being dispossessed since 1652. It didn't just start with 1913. 1913, I would say, was probably the culmination of that. So there was general land dispossession. And of course, mines were started, and part of pushing people away from the land, besides acquiring land for themselves, was also to make sure that people did not have a livelihood so that they can be forced to go and work in the mines. And that's why they introduced all these kind of taxes, which you had to use hard currency to pay. So you could not work on your land and live on your land. You had to now go and be employed either in the mines or somewhere or in the sugar cane. Of course, they also brought people from Asia as indentured labor to come and work, especially in the sugar cane fields. And so on. Because we don't have time, I won't go into details. The mineral resources. The mineral resources should be and are collective heritage. But we know what the situation was. They were not treated as such. And even financial institutions, everything was geared against Africans, even being entrepreneurs. The best we could be was to have some shop or butchery or somewhere in the township. But we were not given the tools or the space to be proper entrepreneurs. Women in that context were the most oppressed because, as I say, workers were exploited, super exploited during that time. So black people were discriminated. It doesn't matter who you are a doctor, you are something. If you are just black, there's discrimination. If you are a worker class, there's discrimination. But if you are a woman, you occupy the bottom rank of society. And if you are